Amen. Well, since Isaiah chapter 13, a couple weeks ago, if you remember, we started kind of a new section that's going to go all the way to chapter 23, and that's just kind of this judgment section as these 9 different nations that surround Israel all kind of get their own judgment talked about them. And the last couple of weeks have been really interesting as we've seen how it fits in with a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East throughout history, and then even somewhat recently. Tonight, a little bit of a different flavor in these 3 chapters, but still some pretty interesting prophecies that Isaiah makes in regards to some stuff going on in Africa. We'll see Egypt and Ethiopia mentioned here this evening. But in chapter 18, verse 1, he says, "Woe to the land shadowed with buzzing wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia." Some translations say beyond the regions of Cush, and Cush is the region in the Bible that today we would call Ethiopia, Sudan, part of Sudan, and part of Somalia. So it's like that, some of that northern Africa there on the eastern northern Africa region. But the King James, I think, and the New King James use the term Ethiopia. But woe to the land shadowed with buzzing wings, which is beyond the river of Ethiopia, which sends ambassadors by sea, even in vessels of reeds on the waters, saying, "Go swiftly, messengers, to a nation tall and smooth of skin, to a people terrible from their beginning onward, a nation powerful and treading down, whose lands the river divides." Now, I don't believe this that I'm going to tell you next, but there's some popularity. I think there was like a book that was written a couple of decades ago that was looking at Isaiah chapter 18 in light of it actually applying to America. I don't actually think this is talking about us, but I'll just show you a few things of why some people think that. They go, "Woe to the land of the shadow with buzzing wings." The idea that the place of wings, and they liken that to like an eagle representing America. And it says, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, or beyond the region of Cush, if you will. Not just in Cush, they would interpret it, but beyond Cush, which sends ambassadors by sea. And I mean, we're a nation that sends ambassadors all over the globe, even in vessels of reeds on waters, saying, "Go swift to messengers, to a nation tall and smooth of skin, to a people terrible from their beginning, and onward, a nation powerful and treading down, whose lands and rivers are divided." Verse 3, "All the inhabitants of the world and dwellers of the earth, when he lifts up a banner on the mountain, you see it, and when he blows a trumpet, you hear it. For as the Lord said to me, I will take my rest, and I will look for my dwelling place like clear heat and sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of the harvest. For before the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripened in the flower, he will both cut off the springs with pruning hooks, and take away and cut down the branches, and they will be left together for the mountains, birds of prey, and for the beasts of the earth. The birds of prey of summer on them, and the beasts of the earth will winter on them." Verse 7, "In that time a present will be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people tall and smooth of skin, and from a people terrible from their beginning onward, a nation powerful and treading down, whose lands the rivers divide, to a place of the name of the Lord of hosts, to Mount Zion." In verse 7 there, a land where the rivers divide. People go, "Well, America has rivers." It's like, well, yeah, a lot of countries have rivers. So to me, that's reading into it. I think it's talking about what we would call more modern day Ethiopia, that Cush region there in Africa, and a people who are tall with smooth skin. You've seen these people, these nice tall black people with smooth skin. It seems to be talking about that. And what's real interesting about it is verse 7 of this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 18, when it says, "In that time, a present is going to be brought to the Lord of hosts from these people who are tall and smooth of skin, and from a people terrible or like powerful or awesome, terrible from their beginning onward, a nation that's powerful and treading down, whose lands the rivers divide, to a place of the name of the Lord of hosts, to Mount Zion. So if you get to verse 7, the conclusion of this whole prophecy is that those people, whatever he's talking about, we would say Cush, Ethiopia most likely, they're going to one day, verse 7, in that time, they're going to present these presents before the Lord in the place of Zion, or in Israel, in Jerusalem. And you go, okay, is there any significance to Ethiopians and this prophecy somewhat that's being spoke about here? And I want to look at a couple things biblically, a couple things historically, and then a few things prophetically into how Isaiah 18 might be fitting into what takes place. First of all, if you remember back in 1 Kings chapter 10, we have the third king of Israel, and that is King Solomon, David's son. And he has a massive, powerful kingdom, and rumor about his kingdom has spread. And one of these people who heard rumor about the kingdom that King Solomon had decided to go for herself and see if all these grand stories about Solomon's kingdom is true. And that's what 1 Kings chapter 10 is all about, when it says, now, when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Most likely, this queen of Sheba is from the land of Ethiopia, and she travels to find out for herself if all this is true and the wisdom that Solomon possesses is actually the case. 1 Kings 10 verse 2 goes on to say, she came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels, and she bore spices with much gold, precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. So Solomon answered all of her questions, and there was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon and the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Then she said to the king, it was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and I saw it with my own eyes. And indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame of which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, whom stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delights in you, setting you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord has loved Israel forever. Therefore, he made you king to do justice and righteousness. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones, and there never again came such abundance of spices as the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So there's this queen of Sheba, Cush area, Ethiopia, giving these gifts to the king. Now, this is happening before, though. This is happening way before Isaiah is prophesying. So his prophecy can't be talking about this. There's something else, but I'm going somewhere here real quick. Verse 11, he says, also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold and Ophir, they brought great quantities of almug wood and precious stones of Ophir. And the king made steps of almug wood for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, also harps and stringed instruments for strings. There never again came such almug wood, nor has there like been seen to this day. Now King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. So she turned and went to her own country and her servants. She's there, she gives gifts, Solomon gives gifts to her, he speaks wisdom, she leaves. Now, what's real interesting is there's a pretty large demographic group of Jews that live in Ethiopia. They're African Jews. They're Ethiopians, but they practice Judaism. Their tradition says, not the Bible, but their tradition says that when that Queen of Sheba came back to Ethiopia, she came back with a child that Solomon was the father of, and that she gave birth to a son of Solomon in Ethiopia, and that's where these people come from, these Ethiopian Jews. That's interesting. There's really no proof to that. That's just their tradition. It could be the case. It could not be. But what is the case, there's this big old culture of Jews that live in Ethiopia. And in 1991, they were experiencing this great persecution. These are called Beta Israel, these Ethiopian Jews. They're also called Falash Jews, F-A-L-A-S-H, Falash Jews. If you just Google that, you'll see pictures of Ethiopian Jews. And what happened is because they're getting this persecution as this regime change is changing in Ethiopia, Israel decides that they're going to sneak into Ethiopia and they're going to rescue as many of these Ethiopian Jews and bring them to Israel. So in 1991, I think it was actually May 14th, 1991, they decide, with the help of the United States, they decide that they're going to go in, and they go in to the main airport, and it just looks like commercial jets. And the Israeli soldiers are dressed like civilians, and they end up sneaking out 14,325 of these Ethiopian Jews and bring them to the land of Israel where they live even till today. It was an interesting thing that happened in history. So here's a group of people from this region of Cush that end up being taken, and they get brought. They're already believers in Yahweh. They're Jewish people, and they get brought to the land of Israel where they get to live. I don't know if that has anything to do with this prophecy. I find that just interesting to point out. Something else as I was reading this, because when I'm studying things like this, it's like, okay, where are there significant characters in the Bible that can be somewhat connected to or associated with some of these things? So it's like, okay, Queen of Sheba in the Old Testament, but before Isaiah, she seems to be Ethiopian. There's some sort of maybe correlation there. But then in the New Testament, we encounter, if you remember in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch. And he's definitely from Ethiopia. He was in Israel worshiping the Lord on one of the holy days. What's an Ethiopian doing in Israel? He's a Jew. How did he become a Jew? I don't know. Maybe because from the whole thing of 1 Kings 10. But there's all these Jews in Ethiopia, even back in Acts day. So this Ethiopian Jew goes up, he worships, he's on his way back home. He encounters Philip, if you remember, on the road. And this Ethiopian Jew happens to be reading actually the book of Isaiah, the very book we're studying. And as he's reading the scroll of Isaiah, he's not in chapter 18, but he happens to be in chapter 53. And Philip is walking alongside of the chariot after the Lord has told him, go talk to that guy in the chariot. And he walks up to him and he asks him, what are you reading? Oh, the prophet Isaiah. I'm in the scroll 53. He quotes from it, the Ethiopian Jew. And then he says to Philip, he goes, but I don't understand what this means unless someone tells me. And Philip goes, well, I know what it means. So we'll get on up here. So he gets in his chariot and they talk about it. And anyway, Philip ends up baptizing him. And then he ends up disappearing. Philip does. He gets translated. But the point with that is, okay, there's something else here maybe. There's this prophecy about some Ethiopians that are going to go to the land of Zion, to Jerusalem. There's going to be a gift made. And although this Ethiopian doesn't necessarily bring a gift, he brings, his heart is a gift, and he believes in Jesus. So that's just kind of interesting to see. We learned that back in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, that this might be somewhat of a fulfillment of this as well. 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse number 23, that during the reign of Hezekiah, it says, and many brought gifts to the Lord at Jerusalem and presented to Hezekiah, king of Judah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all the nations thereafter. So during the time of Hezekiah, which is during this same time of Isaiah in there, these people end up bringing gifts to Jerusalem from all over, presenting them to the Lord, which is what Isaiah chapter 18 verse 7 says is going to happen. So all those things are somewhat allusions. Find them interesting. There might be something there, but to me, the ultimate fulfillment of a people who are tall with smooth skin, who one day are going to go to the land of Israel and be bringing gifts to the Lord, is going to happen during the kingdom, during the millennial kingdom when Jesus comes back. Because in Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 7, we learn that this is going to happen when Jesus returns. Isaiah 60, verse 1 says, "Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be nursed at your side. Then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart shall swell with joy, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you, and the wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. The multitude of camels shall cover your land. The dromedarians of the Midians and the Ephraim, all from Sheba shall come, and they shall bring gold and incense, and they shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. And all the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together to the rams of Nebuoth, and they shall minister to you, and they shall ascend with acceptance of my altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory." In that day, all the Gentile nations during the time of the millennial kingdom are going to come journey to Jerusalem, and they're going to bring gifts to the King, to the Lord, to Jesus. And then also just one last thing that falls right in line with that is in Zechariah. In Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16, we learn that it's going to come to pass that everyone who's left of all the nations which came against Israel shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So the day will come when all of the non-Jews, the Gentiles, during the time of the kingdom, are going to journey to Jerusalem, and they're going to be worshiping Jesus as he physically rules and reigns from this planet. And that's probably what the end of Isaiah chapter 18 is alluding to. Specifically, one of those groups of people is going to be these Cushites, or these people of Ethiopia. Chapter 19, we're going to see a judgment that comes upon Egypt. Chapter 19, verse 1 says, "The burden against Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud, and he's going to come into Egypt. The idols of Egypt will totter at his presence, and the heart of Egypt will melt in its midst." Now, Egypt and Israel, or Judah, God's people, they have a long history. If you remember all the way back in the book of Genesis, we have Joseph there towards the end of the book of Genesis, who ends up getting sold by his brothers, and he eventually ends up as a slave in Egypt. And then he gets promoted, and then he gets demoted, and then he gets re-promoted, and he kind of rules right next to Pharaoh there in Egypt. And then you get into the book of Exodus, and God's people get overtaken as slaves in Egypt. So Egypt and God's people have a long-running history, and God says here in Isaiah chapter 19 that the time is going to come when Egypt is going to be judged. Verse 2 goes on to say, "I'm going to set the Egyptians against Egyptian, and everyone is going to fight against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt will fall in its midst, and it will destroy their counsel, and they will consult the idols and the charmers and the mediums and the sorcerers, and the Egyptians I will give into the hand of a cruel master, and a fierce king will rule over them, says the Lord of hosts." The day is coming when Egypt is going to be overtaken by a cruel master. They're going to end up fighting each other in like a civil war, which is going to weaken them after they get overtaken. There's going to be this confusion. They're going to be fighting against each other. And specifically, God says, verse 4, "The Egyptians I'm going to give into the hand of a cruel master." And I just find that a little bit ironic that God would say that, because if you remember back in Exodus chapter 1, verses 11 through 14, when the Pharaoh died who knew Joseph and his family, who knew the Jews, there arose another Pharaoh in Egypt, it says in Exodus, who didn't know Joseph and who didn't know how God had used Joseph in a powerful way to help save Egypt. So what happens is this next Pharaoh enslaves the Jewish people, and they're slaves for quite some time. And we see how they've been treated by the Egyptians in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. It says, therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and there were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick, and in all manner of service in the field. And all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. When the Egyptians were overpowering the Israelites, when the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians were a hard taskmaster on them. All these years later, God gives this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 4. He says, the day is going to come when the Egyptians are going to be overtaken, and when they're overtaken, they're going to be overtaken by a cruel master. Just like they were cruel to my people, God says, they're going to be overtaken by a cruel master. And sure enough, the Assyrian king in 670 BC, this is just according to history, 670 BC, this Assyrian king, Hagen, comes in and overtakes Egypt. And he's a cruel master. He divides up Egypt, and it causes them to fight with each other, just like Isaiah prophesies about. So, the judgment of Egypt happens, and then verse 5 goes on to say, the waters will fail from the sea, and the rivers will be wasted and dried up. The rivers will turn foul, and the brooks of defense will be emptied and dried up, and the reeds and the rushes will wither. The papyrus reeds by the river, by the mouth of the river that's being alluded to here is the Nile River there in Egypt. All this stuff's going to be dried up in the Nile, and everything sown by the river will wither, be driven away, and be no more. The fishermen also will mourn, and also those will be lamented who cast hooks into the river, and they will languish who spread nets on the waters. Moreover, those who work in fine flax and those who weave fine fabric will be ashamed, and its foundations will be broken, and all who make wages will be troubled of soul. In verses 5 through 10, there's this judgment, there's this consequence that's going to happen that's directly associated with the river there in Egypt, the Nile River. Now, probably throughout history, there was times of drought and times of flooding there in the Nile, and it could be that during this time, God dried up the Nile for a season. But what a lot of people see that fits here that I find real fascinating in verses 5 through 10, it seems like what's being described here is the Aswan Dam that was built in 1970 or completed in 1970. There's this great idea that we're going to build this massive dam across the Nile River. It's one of the most remarkable structures of this century. They built this huge dam, the Aswan Dam in the Nile River, and the idea is we're going to stop it from flooding because every year it would flood during the rainy season, and then they had no control over it. So they build it. This thing is 364 feet tall, and it's 12,565 feet long, this Aswan Dam. And they build it, and you're not going to guess what happens shortly after they build it. They realize this isn't a good thing because it's stopping the Nile River. It used to kind of do this washing out process, which would allow the soil, when it would flood, it'd kind of do this whole washout thing and bring great nutrients to the ground. Now that they've controlled it to where it's not flooding anymore, it really affected agriculture below the dam, so much so that people were talking about how they should blow up the dam in order to help. But when you read the consequences of it, verses 5 through 10, it sounds like the consequence of the Aswan Dam being built when it says, people aren't going to be able to grow things anymore. The fish are going to dry up. The papyrus reeds that grow along the riverbank so regularly are just going to be done away with. And some people see verses 5 through 7 as a bit of a fulfillment in the building of the Aswan Dam because the repercussions that are described here match like perfectly with what people see happen after that was built in 1970. So that's kind of interesting to see. Verse 11 says, surely the princes of Zoan are fools. Pharaoh's wise counsel give foolish counsel. How do you say to Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, the son of the ancient kings. Where are they? Where are your wise men? Let them tell you now, and let them know what the Lord of hosts has purposed against Egypt. The princes of Zoan have become fools, the princes of Noph, and deceived. And they have also deluded Egypt, those who are the mainstay of its tribes. The Lord has mingled a perverse spirit in her midst, and they have caused Egypt to err in all her works, as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. Neither will there be any work for Egypt, which the head or the tail, palm branch or bulrush may do. Then verse 16 says, in that day, Egypt will be like a woman and will be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he waves over it. Now, throughout verses 16 through verse 25 to the end of this chapter, we're going to see the phrase "in that day" used 5 times in the closing of this prophecy. Generally speaking, it's not maybe 100% true, but it's probably 99% true in the book of Isaiah. When you see the term "in that day" or "in those days" in the prophecy, it's always alluding to like the day of the Lord, the end times, future stuff. Not a near fulfillment, but a far fulfillment. And that's what we see unfolding here. In that day, in the end, Egypt is going to be like a woman, and Egypt is going to be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand or the judgment that the Lord of hosts is going to bring upon it. Now, the imagery he's giving there is back then the men would go to battle, not the ladies. And the ladies would be afraid, maybe, if a bad guy came in. So his point is Egypt is going to be afraid. And then verse 17, he says, the land of Judah is going to be a terror to Egypt. Egypt is going to be afraid of Judah, of God's people, of Israel. And everyone who makes mention of it will be afraid in himself because of the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he has determined against it. That's the ending of the judgment of Egypt, verses 1 through 17. Now, as we get into verse 18, we're going to see that although God has spoken judgment over Egypt, now he's going to tell us that also in that day, in the future, in the end, he's going to save Egypt after it's judged. Watch verse 18 to the end of this chapter. In that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt are going to speak the language of Canaan and swear by the Lord of hosts, and one will be called the city of destruction. In that day, these cities in Egypt are going to speak the language of Canaan. What's the language of Canaan? Hebrew. Canaan land is the promised land. It's Israel. So the language of Canaan is Hebrew. So in that day, Egyptians are going to be speaking Hebrew, and they're going to be speaking it to the Lord. And there's going to be a city in Egypt called the city of destruction, or some translations put city of the sun, which is the city of Heliopolis there in Egypt, which kind of makes sense. Verse 19 says, in that day, there's going to be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt. So the Egyptians are going to be speaking Hebrew, and they're going to be building an altar to the Lord in their land, and there's going to be a pillar to the Lord at its border. I heard an interesting suggestion there that's referring to actually the pyramid. And I don't know. It went above my head as I was reading into it, but some people saw an allusion there to it actually dealing with the pyramid because of the words that are used, but who knows. Verse 20, and it'll be for a sign and for a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt, for they will cry to the Lord because of the oppressors, and he will send them a Savior and a mighty one, and he's going to deliver them. This is the Egyptians. God is rescuing, God is saving one day. Then the Lord will be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day, and will make sacrifices and offerings. Yes, they will make a vow to the Lord and perform it. And the Lord is going to strike Egypt, but he's going to strike and heal it. Wow. He's going to judge it. There's consequences coming to Egypt. That's the first part of chapter 19. He's going to strike them, but he's also going to heal them. In the striking, he's actually healing them. In the disciplining them, he's doing it to bring them to him. So the Lord's going to strike them, yeah, but he's also going to heal them, and they will return to the Lord, and he will be entreated by them, and he will heal them. Verse 23, in that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians are going to come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. That's crazy, because the Assyrians, like we saw previously, are going to end up overtaking Egypt. They're an enemy of Egypt in 670 BC. But Isaiah is looking forward to a day when these enemies, Egypt and Assyria, are going to be getting along. They're going to build a highway between themselves so they have easy access to go back and forth. Verse 20, it gets even crazier. Watch this, 24 and 25. In that day, Israel will be one of three, with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. God goes, one day, there's going to be a time when Egypt, I'm going to call those people my people because they're going to believe in me, they're going to be worshiping me. Assyria, I'm going to declare as the work of my hand, and Israel is going to be my inheritance. And these three groups of people are all getting along as they're worshiping me. By the way, Egypt is Egypt, Assyria is Iraq, and then Israel is Israel. Egypt, Iraq, and Israel are going to all be worshiping God one day. You know what you call that? Peace in the Middle East. You know when that's going to happen? When Jesus returns. That's when this is going to happen. But there will be peace in the Middle East. Isaiah has prophesied of it from the Lord, Isaiah 19:25. This seems unheard of in our world, that you could ever get Iraq, Egypt, and Israel together worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of them getting along. But the day will come when Jesus sets up his kingdom, when that's exactly what's going to take place. Chapter 20, this one's real fun. It's a short one. It goes back to this prophecy that was made previously in chapter 19 and chapter 18. It kind of there's a story behind this of how God uses Isaiah to let these nations know that he's going to judge them. So, chapter 20, verse 1. In the year, first we get some timing, in the year that Tartan came to Ashdod, when Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him, and he fought against Ashdod and took it, at the same time the Lord spoke to Isaiah the son of Amos, saying. So this is a timing verse. When does this prophecy take place? Well, it's the time when, in the year that Tartan, now Tartan's not a name, it's a title. It's like chief commander or president. So Tartan is the title for who? For Sargon, who at this time is the king of Assyria, who comes in and overtakes Ashdod, which is a region in Israel, there on the coast. So it's right around the time when the king of Assyria, whose name is Sargon, he's the Tartan, he's the chief of commanders, and he goes and he overtakes this city, this coastal city. Now what's so cool about Isaiah chapter 20, verse number 1, is that for almost 2 millennia, there was zero historical evidence of Sargon, someone by the name of Sargon being king of Assyria. There was no historical or archaeological records, and people would say, well, this is an example in the Bible where we can't trust it. Up until 1843. And in 1843, this French dude happened to be doing some digging around Iraq and Assyria, and he finds proof of Sargon II, who's the Assyrian king that's mentioned in the Bible, but otherwise was lost in history. And it was discovered in 1843 when archaeologist Paul Emile Botta unearthed this massive palace that had this guy's name all over it, and it was proof that it was his. I say that to say, for 1,500 years, 1,500 years, 1,800 years, people, archaeologists who, we don't really know where we can find this in the Bible, who knows if we can trust the Bible, and then what happens is archaeology finally catches up with God's word. It catches up, and this is how it always works. Whenever there's something in here that people go, well, where's this, or what about that, or there's no proof that Pontius Pilate existed until you dig a little more, and wow, they discover this great coin, and oh, Pontius Pilate was real. And you give archaeology, you give science long enough, it'll finally catch up with the Bible. That's all they need is more time, because this is true. And this is just a great example of, in somewhat modern history, I mean, not till 1843, zero historical record, they dig up this guy's palace and they go, oh, wow, Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1 was true all along. It's like, well, duh, I could have told you that. Verse 2, at the same time, it's during this time when Sargon overtakes Ashdod. At that time, the Lord spoke to Isaiah, the son of Amos, saying, go and remove the sackcloth from your body and take your sandals off your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Here's what the Lord tells Isaiah to do. You got this sackcloth on, which is like a picture of mourning because the nation that you're called to prophesy to is ignoring me. Okay, you're done wearing that for now. I want you to take that off, take off your sandals, and I want you to walk through the land barefoot, and it says naked. Now, some people try to say this doesn't mean naked. I'm just going to keep reading and you can come to your own conclusion, but the Lord gets a bit descriptive here. It says, then the Lord said, just as my servant Isaiah walked naked and barefoot for 3 years for a sign and a wonder against Egypt and Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians as prisoners and the Ethiopians of captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, with their buttocks uncovered to the shame of Egypt. Sounds pretty naked to me. Some say, well, they had loincloths. I don't know anything about that. All I know is what it says. It says naked and their butts were out. So what's so unique about this, or just interesting, so the prophecies are in 18 and 19. This is what God says is going to happen. But the way that God has Isaiah tell the people or show the people that this is what's going to happen, he says, I'm going to use your life as an example, Isaiah. I want you to take off that sackcloth, I want you to take off your shoes, and I want you to walk before these people for 3 years, barefoot and naked, because that's an imagery, that's symbolism, that's showing to them, declaring to them, whether if they realize it or not, that the day is coming when the king of Assyria is going to overtake them, and they're going to be led astray, naked and barefoot, just like you've been for the past 3 years, where you've been warning them about this judgment. One of the things that's so neat about God's prophets throughout the Bible, specifically Isaiah and Ezekiel, they're pretty dramatic guys. God has them do some really dramatic things. Here Isaiah, I mean, it's like walk around, naked and barefoot for 3 years. Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 4 gets told to do some strange things by the Lord, some very dramatic things to get a point across. Real quick, Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 1 says, you also, son of man, which is a title that the Lord calls Ezekiel. You also, son of man, take a clay tablet and lay it before you and portray on it the city of Jerusalem. Ezekiel, take a clay tablet and have like a little model of the city of Jerusalem. And I want you to lay siege against it and build a siege wall against it and heap up a mound against it and set camps against it also and place battering rams against it all around. Build this whole model of Israel, Ezekiel, and I want you to kind of play with it, and I want you to overtake the model that I'm going to have you build out of clay, because this is going to be representing what's literally going to happen to these people one day. Moreover, he says, take for yourself an iron plate and set it as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face against it, and it shall besiege, and you shall lay siege against it, and this will be a sign to the house of Israel. Get this plate, put it between you and it, and this is going to be speaking. This is imagery. God's painting a picture for his people through his prophet. And then he goes on in this chapter to list more interesting things for Ezekiel to do. He says, also do this. He goes, lie also on your left side, and lay there in iniquity of the house of Israel, with iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity according to the number of days. 390 days, so you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. I want you to lay on your left side for 390 days, Ezekiel. because you laying on your left side for each day is picturing the number of years that I've been bearing the iniquity of these people. And then he says, verse 6, and when you have completed them, then I want you to now turn over and start sleeping on your right side. I want you to lie on your right side. Then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah for 40 years, or for 40 days, as I have laid on you the day for each year. 139 days on the left, or 390 days on the left side, 40 days on the right side, picturing the years of judgment and iniquity that I've been bearing for both these groups of people. Very dramatic. God's having the prophet act all this out to demonstrate, to show the people. Verse 5, therefore you shall set your face towards the siege of Jerusalem, and your arm shall be uncovered, and you shall prophesy against it. And surely I'm going to restrain you so that you cannot turn from one side or to the other till you have ended the days of your siege. And also take for yourself wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and spelt, and put them into one vessel and make bread of them for yourself during the number of days that you lie on your side. 390 days you shall eat it. And your food which you eat shall be by weight, 20 shekels a day, from the time to time you shall eat it. And you shall also drink water from measures 1/6 of a hin, from time to time you shall drink it. And you shall eat it as barley cakes, and make it using fuel of human waste in their sight. Okay, wait a minute. What are you telling me to do, Lord? I want you to cook bread over poop, human poop, as this declaration to the people. I want all the people to see what you're doing as you're cooking your bread over poop. Because, verse 13, the Lord says, so shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread amongst the Gentiles, where I'm going to drive them. Can we just tell them? I mean, do I really have to act all this out? It's like, what are we doing here, Lord? But notice verse 14. So I said, Lord God, indeed I've never defiled myself from my youth till now. I've never eaten what died of itself, or was torn by beasts, nor was abominable flesh ever come into my mouth. Then he said to me, see, I am giving you cow dung instead of human waste. Well, that's a compromise, I guess. Go ahead and cook over cow patties instead of people poops. And you shall prepare your bread over it. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, surely I will cut off the supply of bread in Jerusalem, and they shall eat bread by weight and with anxiety, and they shall drink water by measure with dread, that they may lack bread and water and be dismayed with one another and waste away because of their iniquity. God uses the prophet, God uses the life of the prophet to demonstrate, to illustrate the judgment that he's going to bring on the people that called them to. I mean, in the book of Acts, even in the New Testament, in Acts chapter, I think it's Acts chapter 21, verses 10 through 11, Paul's trying to get to Jerusalem, and this prophet Agabus encounters him and says, you don't want to go to Jerusalem, and he's got this leather belt on, and he takes his leather belt off, and he ties up his hands, and he goes, if you go to Jerusalem, you'll be bound, just like this very dramatic thing. And it's like, God's prophets are just dramatic guys, and even today, the prophetic people are generally dramatic. It's great. They're just full of charisma, and that's how God made them. And it's right here, God's got Isaiah walking about naked for these 3 years as a sign, verse 3, that the Lord said, just as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and a wonder against Egypt and Ethiopia. But here's the application real quick. What's God doing in all these obscure accounts? God's using his person, the prophet, his people, his person, the prophet, as a demonstration, as an illustration to the people. Or we could say this way, the actions of the prophet or the life of the prophet is a demonstration and illustration to the people. And even just this past Sunday morning in Titus, we saw Titus talking a lot about how we should act as Christians, because our life as followers of Jesus is a demonstration, it's an illustration to the world that we're called to. And God's saying something to people through what we do. He's saying something through the people through what Isaiah's doing, walking around naked and barefoot, but he's saying something to the people through what we do, through our actions, through the witness that we're giving. Well, verse 4, he says, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians as prisoners, and the Ethiopians as captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. Then they, meaning Judah, God's people, then they, Judah, shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and Egypt, their glory. Because the Assyrians were moving in north, Judah to the south, Israel to the north, we've dealt with this before, but because the Assyrians are moving in up north, Judah in the south is getting worried that they're going to be next. So what they start doing is looking around to their neighbors to try to make alliances. And one of the people they were looking at big time and making deals with was Egypt. So Isaiah's already told the people, you need to trust in the Lord, not in all these other nations, to make political alliances to try to give you victory over the enemy. So what a lot of these prophecies are doing is it's showing God's people, whether if they're recognizing it or not, these other people that you're trusting in, God's saying, I'm going to have taken over. I'm going to have destroyed by the very enemy you're afraid of. So then they, Judah, shall be afraid, verse 5, and ashamed of Ethiopia, and their expectation, they're thinking, man, we thought Egypt was going to help us, but Egypt actually ends up getting overtaken by Assyria in 670 BC. Verse 6, and the inhabitants of the territory will say in that day, surely such is our expectation, wherever we flee for help, to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? Wherever we keep looking for help from our biggest enemy, Assyria, we're getting word that God's going to have the Assyrians overtake them. So their conclusion, how shall we escape? Who are we supposed to look to help us if we can't look to the Ethiopians and the Egyptians, if the Assyrians are even going to get them? And God's point, he's reiterating the point that he's already made, and it's, you need to look to me. You need to stop looking to the Egyptians or the Ethiopians or whoever else. You need to quit putting your trust in them, and you need to put your trust in me. The whole point of Isaiah chapters 18, 19, and 20 is God is declaring to his people, you need to trust me, not anyone else. And famous passage, Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, the Lord says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. What these prophecies are echoing is that truth, that God's people need to be trusted in him, not in anything else, because anything else will fail, but he will not fail. He's got us. So there we have it. Don't be trusted in Ethiopia or Egypt. And watch how God uses your life as a witness to speak to the people around you. Probably not going to call you to walk around barefoot and naked. Probably not. But he is going to call you to do certain things that is going to cause people to watch you and to get their attention. And he wants you to do it in obedience, because through you doing it, he's saying something to those around you. They're watching. They're observing. They're reading your life. So that's kind of cool. Next week, we'll do chapters 21, 22, and 23. So read ahead there. And we'll keep chugging right along. But let's pray. We'll sing a song first, then we'll pray.